At the gates of an airport, Clara Blackwell ripped her boarding pass in half with a quick motion, smiling coldly as she tossed it aside. "Next time, maybe you should dress like you actually belong," the gate agent said with a venomous tone, her words dripping with contempt. The pieces of the first-class ticket floated to the floor like discarded confetti, a reminder of where Clara didn't belong. The people around her fell into an uncomfortable silence, unsure whether to speak up or pretend they didn't notice. A man pretended to check his phone, avoiding eye contact. A woman in luxury heels sighed loudly, clearly irritated that the boarding process had paused for someone like Clara. Captain James Holt, the flight's commanding officer, stepped forward. His tall, stern figure was as rigid as his expression. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice businesslike, though it hinted at a growing frustration. Margot Steele, the flight attendant, raised her eyebrows in feigned surprise before giving James a quick shrug. No priority verification, attempted to board early. James glanced at Clara, taking in her modest outfit. A simple blouse, well-worn slacks, and no designer handbag in sight. No glossy ticket either. Just an air of quiet defiance. He squinted, assessing her demeanor, and finally said, "Unless you've got clearance or status, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside. The real first-class passengers need to board." At the mention of real, heads turned, but no one spoke out loud. Clara remained still, not reacting with anger, but instead, her gaze sharp and calm. She smiled, not out of amusement, but recognition. She had seen this kind of thing before, at business meetings, in high-end hotels, and even at airport gates. The same sneers, the same assumptions. "You don't belong. You're tearing federal property," Clara said quietly, looking at the torn boarding pass on the ground. James rolled his eyes, dismissing her statement. "That's just a boarding pass, not a government document." Clara's gaze sharpened. "That pass was issued under the Global Integrity Protocol, which means it's logged. You've just destroyed an official record." Margot's arms folded as she blocked Clara's path to the cabin door. "We've asked you nicely," she said. "If you don't comply, we'll have to call security." Clara glanced past her to the open cabin door, then spoke softly. "You just tore an official document. Do you want me to make the call?" Just then, her smartwatch buzzed. A gridlock alert blinked on the screen. The flight attendant stepped aside, but Clara remained where she was, pulling out a fresh boarding pass, one that looked almost identical, yet unbranded and plain. "Let the system decide," Clara said, holding it up toward the security camera. James's patience evaporated. "Security to gate 3, he snapped, before walking away in frustration. Still calm, Clara didn't move from her spot. Her smartwatch vibrated once more, a soft ping that nearly went unnoticed by the others around her. Seconds later, an alert flashed on James's screen. 4 airports had received signal disruptions. Over 150 flights across the Global Integrity Platform, including theirs, were now grounded. At that exact moment, the man who had tried to remove her, James Holt, had no clue that his career had just come to an end. Clara Blackwell wasn't just a regular passenger, she was the architect of the very system that had just frozen their flight. As Clara took her seat in 1A, she opened her tablet, taking notes, not out of spite, but as part of a documented process. Margot stood in the back, glancing at Clara from across the cabin with suspicion. From the row behind, Lila, a young tech analyst, couldn't help but stare, captivated by the unusual calm Clara exuded. Lila had no idea who Clara was, but she felt something changing in the air. Farther back, in the economy section, a travel blogger named Isaac Collins snapped a photo. It wasn't just a random shot, it was a moment that would soon go viral. Clara didn't flinch when a few passengers started to murmur, muttering about how she didn't belong. She didn't need to hear their words. She had lived through them before. She could feel the pressure from behind, but this time, it was different. She wasn't going to shrink from it. "Isn't she just trying to cause a scene?" someone whispered from behind her. "Why don't they just move her?" another voice murmured. In the front of the cabin, Margot hurriedly tapped on her tablet, marking Clara's status as unverified and disruptive. With one swift move, she sealed Clara's fate in the airline's internal system. In row 8, Isaac began typing a quick post in his app. Passenger flagged without cause. Cabin crew ignoring protocols. FA should look at this. He paused, glanced up at Clara and added, she's not reacting. She's watching them as if she knows something they don't. Isaac hit send. The world was about to change. Back at the control center, Clara's smartwatch pinged again, showing new data streams cascading into the system. In less than a minute, the Global Integrity Protocol had flagged the entire fleet, grounding flights across the world. Margot's tablet blinked red. Access denied. The screen read, followed by, protocol locked. She tried again. Nothing. James Holt, out of options, muttered curses as he returned to the cockpit. Margot looked at Clara one last time, then left, her expression now more cautious than before. Clara didn't care. She wasn't going to move. Instead, she opened her tablet, prepared for the next steps. The Global Compliance Review was already active, and her system had already logged the incident. It wasn't about revenge, it was about transparency, accountability, and justice. As the flight continued to stand still, Isaac felt the energy in the air shift. This wasn't just a delayed flight. It was the beginning of something bigger. The press was already catching on, and soon enough, the entire world would know Clara Blackwell was no ordinary passenger. She was the force behind the system now in place. The world had been put on notice. As the days turned into weeks, the ripples of Clara Blackwell's actions continued to spread across the aviation industry, shaking it to its core. What began as a simple, yet powerful stand against discrimination on a single flight transformed into an undeniable movement. Clara didn't raise her voice or throw accusations. She simply used the tools she had built to make the system recognize its failures. And in doing so, she rewrote the rules for an entire industry. The first signs of change were subtle but significant. Airlines, once comfortable in their position of unchecked power, began to feel the heat. They could no longer operate with the same indifference toward passenger treatment, especially when it came to issues of bias and discrimination. Clara's initiative, the Global Integrity Protocol, was already being adopted as a standard, and now the airlines were scrambling to comply, implement new ethics training, and revamp their internal systems. The threat of public exposure through the Flight Justice Index, FJI, made them accountable in real time for every action and every decision made in the cabin, from the crew's interactions with passengers to the handling of complaints. Clara knew that change would not come easily. The powerful players at the top of the industry were not going to give up their dominance without a fight. But she was patient, unwavering. Behind her calm demeanor was a clear understanding. This wasn't just about getting one airline to follow the rules. It was about building a system that couldn't be ignored. It was about creating a structure that forced airlines, their crews, and their executives to confront the biases that had long been woven into the fabric of air travel. The mainstream media began to pick up on the story, and soon Clara's name was on the lips of every journalist, activist, and policymaker. What had once been a private confrontation between one woman and a few gate agents became a national conversation about fairness and the right to be treated with dignity, regardless of race, gender, or appearance. Social media erupted with support, as passengers and flight attendants alike shared their own stories of mistreatment and abuse. Clara had given them a voice they had long been denied. But as her visibility grew, so did the resistance. Corporate lobbyists worked behind closed doors, pushing back against the new standards, trying to dilute the Flight Justice Index or sidestep the system altogether. They argued that these new measures would cost airlines too much, threatening profits and operational efficiency. They complained that the system was too much of an inconvenience, too much of a disruption to their business-as-usual approach. Claire, however, remained unfazed. She knew that the disruption was necessary for the greater good. The system had worked for the powerful for too long, and now it was time for it to serve everyone. The industry had become complacent in its privilege, assuming that passengers had no recourse for the injustices they faced. Clara's work was the reckoning, the moment when the status quo could no longer stand unchallenged. Her message was simple, yet profound. Asterisk accountability doesn't have to be loud to be effective. It just has to be real. Asterisk with the Flight Justice Index in full operation, Every instance of discrimination, every wrongful removal, and every unjustified action would be logged, flagged, and addressed. The FJI made it impossible for the industry to continue operating with a blind eye. It demanded transparency, and it delivered results. As Clara's influence grew, the conversation expanded. The Sky Grid system wasn't just for air travel anymore. Internationally, airports and airlines from Europe to Asia began adopting Clara's standards. The United Nations reached out to her to discuss global implications. What began as an isolated act of defiance in an airport terminal had evolved into a worldwide movement for justice, one that held corporations, governments, and industries accountable for their actions. But Clara didn't stop there. She turned her attention to the next phase of the mission, ensuring that smaller, underfunded carriers could comply with the new rules. She understood that true change would only come when everyone had access to the same opportunities for transparency and fairness. She pushed for scholarships and funding to help those airlines, especially minority-owned and regional carriers, adopt the technology and training necessary to meet the new standards. Meanwhile, the press couldn't get enough of her. Every major news outlet was running stories, interviewing activists, and broadcasting the success stories of passengers who had been treated with respect thanks to the new system. The public, once passive, had now become an active force for change. Passengers began demanding better treatment, and airlines that failed to comply saw their ratings drop. The power had shifted. The passengers were now in control. Clara's system empowered the overlooked, reshaping industries for fairness and accountability. Her work transformed aviation, but the mission for equality continued, with dignity soaring where it once faltered.